Good morning, Redwell School. I'm Reverend Dawn Airy. I'm the vicar of the church that meets in your school hall. Now, I'm going to tell you about some of the events that led up to Easter Sunday. And it starts just 1 week before, called Palm Sunday. So let's go inside this old church building and let's take a look. On Palm Sunday, people in Jesus' time, they were dreaming of a time when they would be free from the Roman soldiers who ruled their lives. They were hoping for a strong leader who would help them get rid of their enemies. So when Jesus came into Jerusalem, the crowd of people who had come to meet him, they were so excited because they'd heard all about his teaching, all about his miracles. So they knew that he was a really special person. And on that day, he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. I wonder if you can see the large picture of the donkey in the background. And as he rode in, they waved lots of palm branches. You can see lots of palm branches here too. And they made lots of noise and they shouted, "Hosanna! Hosanna!" They were so excited. He was a bit like a celebrity. However, not everyone was excited about Jesus coming into Jerusalem. In fact, some of the religious leaders, they were grumbling. They were unhappy and they were very worried that the people would think that Jesus was much more important than they were. Jesus had come to change everything, but not in the way that people expected him to do. Well, just a few days later on the Thursday, we now call it Maundy Thursday, Jesus wanted to call his friends. They were called his disciples, his closest friends, and there were 12 of them. And he wanted to call them together to eat together. And they came and sat in a big room and had a meal together. And as they ate, Jesus told his disciples, his closest friends, that he was really looking forward to the Passover feast, which was an important Jewish festival, and that he wanted to eat his last meal with them. Imagine their shock. What? What, Jesus? Well, as they were eating, Jesus told them that one of them would betray him. And they all denied it. No, not me, not me. But Judas Iscariot, he knew what he was about to do. And Judas left, and for a few measly coins, he betrayed Jesus by telling the soldiers and the authorities where they could find Jesus. Well, as part of the meal, Jesus took the loaf and he broke it and he gave thanks to God for it. And he placed a little bit on each one of the disciples' plates for them. And he said, "This loaf of bread is like my body." And then he picked up a cup of wine and he gave thanks to God for that too. And then he said, "This wine is like my blood." What he meant was, he really wanted the disciples, his friends, to understand that as they ate that bread together and as they drank that wine, that they should imagine Jesus' body being broken and Jesus' blood being poured out, because he was going to die for them and for everyone. He was going to die on the cross so that we could be forgiven for all the things that we've done wrong. Jesus' Last Supper with his friends was the day of the Passover feast, when people remembered how God had looked after them in the past many years previously. These days, in our church and in churches across the world, on Sundays, we still share that same meal. We call it communion, where we break the bread and we drink a sip of wine to remind us of Jesus' body broken and his blood poured out on the cross. And he did it because he loved us so much that he was willing to die so we could be forgiven. So Jesus lived in a hot and very dry country. And most people in those days, they travelled around by foot. So they would wear sandals, but they wouldn't have socks or trainers or anything like that. Can you imagine how smelly and how dusty and dirty that would be? So when they visited somebody's house, it was the custom for them to have their feet washed in some nice, cool, clean water. So here we are. You can see here that this is the sort of thing that people's feet would have been washed in. 1 foot either side And here's the jar of clean water. And ordinarily, it would be the servant of the household who would do that. So imagine Jesus' friends' surprise by what actually happened on this particular evening. Now, the Bible tells us this. Jesus got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel, just like this one, around his waist. After that, he poured water into the basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Utterly shocking to them. Wonder why Jesus did that. Wonder what you think about that. Well, there are probably a number of reasons, but I think one of the main reasons was to show us that whoever we are, however important or not we think we are, that we must be ready to take care of one another, even if it means doing something that we don't really want to do. Jesus said to his disciples this, "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet. You should also wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." Now, of course, Jesus didn't just mean we should go around washing each other's feet. That would be funny, wouldn't it? But what he does mean is that we should be willing to help people whenever and wherever we can, even if it means doing things we'd really rather not do. So how can we show care to people today? Well, there's lots of things, aren't there? There's maybe a friend who's hurt or feeling sad, or an elderly relative, or taking collections for the people who are having to flee Ukraine because of war. At that meal, Jesus told his friends that 2 days after the Passover feast, he was going to be crucified. That means to be put to death by hanging on the cross. It's the worst sort of death. And after they'd all finished eating, Jesus got up and came to the Garden of Gethsemane. And he asked his friends to wait while he prayed. And he took 3 of his closest friends with him and asked them to pray with him. He knew what was about to happen, but it was still really difficult. In fact, he agreed with the plan, but it was still really agonizing. And he prayed to God that there might be another way other than the cross to save us from the things that we have done wrong. He asked the Father for another way, but he knew in his heart this was the only way. So while he was praying, Judas Iscariot turned up with those Roman soldiers, and Judas kissed Jesus on the cheek so that the soldiers knew which one was Jesus. And Peter, poor Peter, one of his closest friends, just wanted to protect Jesus, so he chopped one of the ears off the Roman soldiers. And Jesus told him off and then healed the Roman soldier's ear and said, "No, this is not the way, stop fighting." But the disciples were frightened and they ran away. And Jesus was tied up by the soldiers and was led away. And then we come to Good Friday and the cross. There's lots of different crosses here. I wonder which is your favourite? I think this one is definitely my favourite. So here we have a representation of a cross. I wonder what you think of when you see the cross. The morning after Jesus had spent time in the Garden of Gethsemane, so the soldiers took him to a place called Golgotha, which was just outside of the city. They put a crown of thorns on his head, with a crown of thorns just hanging at the top of the cross, and then they nailed him to the cross. They put a sign up which said, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." And while they waited for him to die, the soldiers played with some dice. Can you imagine? And they wanted to see who got the highest score so that they could win Jesus' robe. It was very, very hot, and Jesus said he was thirsty. So one of the soldiers, they got a stick with a sponge and put some vinegar on it, and they passed it up to Jesus' lips so he could have something. And then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jesus died. People who believe in Jesus and follow him are called Christians. Sometimes people wear a necklace with a cross, and the cross reminds Christians that Jesus died and then came alive again because he loves us so much. We finally arrive at Easter Sunday. In Jesus' time, when people died, they were often buried in caves, and they were called tombs. And they were cut in some rock. You can see here this wonderful painting of a rock, and you can see the tomb has been cut out. And they placed Jesus in a tomb wrapped in grave clothes. You can see it perhaps just inside some white grave clothes. And they rolled a huge stone across the opening. Here's the stone just there. The grave is currently open. 2 days later, Mary Magdalene and 2 other women set out really early in the morning to visit the grave. As they reached it, they were totally and utterly startled by this dazzling figure of an angel who said, "Don't be afraid. I know you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen just as he said he would." Well, can you imagine their utter amazement? The women, well, they ran to tell the good news to all of their friends. And Christians believe this is the greatest miracle of all the miracles that Jesus did. This is the greatest miracle the world has ever known. I wonder, how would you feel if you were one of those women who arrived at the grave to find that the stone had been rolled away and it was empty, that Jesus had gone because he was now resurrected and alive? So there we are, the Easter story. This is the reason that we celebrate Easter. There's just 2 more things that I really want to tell you about. Firstly, on Good Friday morning from 10 till 11:30, we will be running an event at your school in the hall, which you and your family are invited to. There'll be drinks and snacks and short films about Easter and lots of different crafts for you to do. The second thing is that from Monday the 11th of April, which is when Holy Week starts, it's the week leading up to Good Friday and to Easter Sunday. Perhaps when you're out and about with your family walking or out playing or near the leisure centre or near the school, you will be able to find some very specially painted rocks. Now, some of you might remember that we did this last year. This year, there's around 190 rocks being painted, so it's much more than last year. If you find one of those rocks, then pick it up, take it home with you. Don't re-hide it, you must pick it up and you must take it home with you. And then, on Good Friday morning, bring your lovely painted rock to the Good Friday morning event that I just told you about, and come and show us, and you'll be able to claim one of these lovely chocolate Easter eggs. So don't forget, the event on Good Friday morning is actually for everybody, whether you find a rock or not. And don't worry, if you can't remember all the details that I've just told you about, your parents will receive the details through email from your school. Have a fantastic Easter holidays, Redwell School. Bye for now.